Welcome to the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast series to promote purpose in practice. Each week, this webinar series features an extraordinary individual that provides valuable and impactful services, helping to transform the capabilities of their nonprofit clients. Join us as we explore a variety of topics, all vital to the success of nonprofit organizations. Learn and grow from the experience and expertise of our featured guests. Without further delay, let's introduce you to the host of the Nonprofit Edge podcast series, Chris Looney.
Hey, welcome to the show, everyone. We're glad you joined. Today, I'm joined by Dave Smith, President and CEO of the Heaton Smith Group. Dave is one of the leading voices in philanthropic strategy and gift planning, helping organizations across the country build stronger donor relationships and unlocking transformational giving. His firm has guided countless nonprofits in moving beyond transactional fundraising toward a more holistic approach that aligns donors' financial goals with their deepest values. So welcome to the show, Dave.
Thank you, Chris. I'm a big fan of what you're doing, so thank you.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you. I'm a big fan of yours. We've known each other for a long time, and I always find that your voice is so valuable in the conversation, especially around philanthropy. And I'm excited to dig into today's topic. So let's first, if you don't mind, give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your background in philanthropy, your leadership journey. I know you're founder, CEO of a very substantial firm in our industry, but just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in the sector.
Sure. Thank you again. It's great to be here. So I started in the nonprofit sector by serving as a CEO of a small nonprofit here in Atlanta, and then went into the for-profit sector, came back to the nonprofit industry and led an urban housing organization, Habitat for Humanity's competitor, if you will. That's the best way to describe it. And we did mixed income housing. So I was a fundraiser. We were a medium-sized firm, had to raise about $6 million annually, but became kind of infatuated with gift planning, plan giving, gifts of estates, went to work for a competing firm, and then in 2009 decided to go out on my own, or in 2008 actually, and then started Heaton Smith in February of 2009. So
some good times to start a new company. My goodness.
I know exactly. The market was headed to 5,500 or 6,500. So it was
right.
Scary time, but had all the components in place. And I've learned just from some of the greats in our industry. I've had the privilege of sitting alongside them as colleagues, and they've taught me a lot, and maybe I've taught them a thing or two, but it's been a wonderful journey. We've worked for some really interesting nonprofits, big, very big, as well as, medium-sized nonprofits as well. So,
yeah. Wonderful. All right. So we do want to jump into a conversation that is around gift planning, plan giving, and you often distinguished plan gifts from gift planning. And could you describe in your own words what you see as the key difference between those two terms?
Sure. So as an industry, we've thought of plan giving now for decades as a program that's oriented, one, toward older donors, two, the marketing is oriented to help facilitate bequests, beneficiary designations, and charitable gift annuities. Mm-hmm. So just by virtue of those three, we tend to talk to donors who are 70 and older. It doesn't mean that donors in their 40s and 50s aren't including a charitable beneficiary in their estate plan. But again, the marketing orientation and the conversations are oriented toward older donors because we want a good return on investment. So as I say, that meets the needs of some donors, but not all of an organization's donors. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So gift planning is much more comprehensive. We think of gift planning as a programmatic approach where a development offices encourage collaboration literally amongst all the fundraising functions, donor-facing staff, data science, Marcom, et cetera, donors of all ages, but I would argue particularly those who are aged 50 and older, to help donors align their personal goals, their assets, the capacity and the impact they want to have on your institution, and on average, two more. So it's both now and it's a gift both now and through an estate plan. And it's also proactive. So when we're doing it, say an audit for a nonprofit, one of the recommendations that we often make is for them to tier their prospects. And so all tier one prospects are going to have a very proactive engagement strategy over the next 12 to 24 months. So I'm not relying on a donor to raise their hand. We want that. We still want plan giving marketing, but I'm not relying on me as a director of gift planning to fill my portfolio with hand raisers from marketing materials. I'm proactively determining who are the best gift planning prospects based on their age, based on their giving history, based on their volunteer history, based on their event participation, all those things that go into why would we advance that type of conversation with them. So that's how we distinguish the two. One, the orientation is for older donors focused on bequests, CGAs, and beneficiary designations. The other is a programmatic approach that touches all functions, that is proactive in nature, and that advances a different kind of conversation with those donors who are age 50 and older. And that's going to facilitate a lot more blended gifts, and it's going to facilitate a meaningful number of non-cash assets. So
Okay.
that's how we distinguish between the two.
Yeah, and that is why it's important to have that distinction and why it's important to shift that mindset from sort of simply securing planned gifts to engaging in gift planning for
Mhm.
the reason that it opens up more opportunities. Like how would you restate the benefit to an organization for shifting that mindset?
So if I'm a 55-year-old donor and I have a net worth of $6 million, most of my assets, regardless of age, this is true for somebody 75, and they may be a 1% household wealth, but it's also true for a 55-year-old who is maybe in the 5% household wealth for his or her age category, but they have about 3 to 8% of their assets in cash. So if I'm a gift officer, or if I'm working for a nonprofit whose orientation is to raise current gifts and facilitate bequests, so it's both. But if my orientation is just to talk about cash, then I'm limiting the amount of money, I'm limiting the philanthropic impact that that donor can have on our institution.
Right.
So that's why the gift planning conversation doesn't just talk about their personal goals, their financial goals, their goals for their family, but it also talks about what assets do they own, what impact do they want to have, and what assets could be leveraged to impact my organization now and also through my estate plan. Bequests are still about 85% of all plan gifts facilitated,
Mhm.
yet alone realized in the US. So they're the most important vehicle. I recognize that. But if we're only talking to donors about a testamentary gift and their discretionary income, we know that institutions are leaving money on the table. So it's
Mhm.
this idea of one team, meaning the development office, the Office of Advancement, whatever term you want to use. One team serves a donor rather than just a gift officer,
Mhm.
right? So the data science team has a role for donor identification. Marketing and communications, they have a role for making sure that something around gift planning there's real estate, there's something on gift planning at every piece of donor facing material that goes out, right? The gift planning director has a role because he or she collaborates with major principal and annual gift officers. And then the CEO has a role because he or she assigns metrics for collaboration to make sure that it is a functioning team rather than these individuals working in silos, just talking to donors about a major gift from their discretionary income, or just talking to donors. If I'm a gift planning officer, will you consider leaving us an estate yet? So
Yeah.
it really is this one team idea serving the donor over the donor's philanthropic journey. And of course, that, ideally is decades.
Yeah, that's great. And when or at what stage in a donor's life cycle should organizations really begin the gift planning conversation? And how does that differ from when they might be asking for a planned gift commitment?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is how we think about it. If donors who are at least age 50, right? So 50 and older. But I would say it's donors who are starting to look under the hood of your organization. So maybe they've made three, four, five, six annual gifts to you. Maybe they've attended one, two, ideally at least three events. Maybe they've even served on a committee, but that's not required, of course.
Right.
We're looking for affinity and consecutive year giving history. Once a donor makes their fifth gift, they said, I'm dialed in, or I or we are dialed into your mission,
Nice. Yeah.
right? So it's they're looking under the hood for a healthcare institution. Maybe they asked to go on a tour, right? They're wanting to better understand the impact that the organization is making on those served beyond what is communicated in, say, an annual report. There's Peter Kiroft. Oh my gosh, he was in Boston. He wrote about something called the philanthropic learning curve,
Okay.
and it's essentially a donor goes through six stages. And the first stage is they become a donor and we're young and we make a lot of emotional gifts, small gifts, 5, 10, whatever it is a year. But as we're older, we begin to look at, okay, this is what we're supporting, and maybe we want to narrow our focus. But then ultimately, now again, I want to learn more about your institution. And if I'm raising my hand to say, I want to learn more about your institution, then I would say that's the ideal time to engage a donor in a gift planning conversation, right?
Yeah.
Also, we say 50 and above because the Federal Reserve released new household wealth data in December of 22. And so to be considered in the top 10% household wealth in the US, a 50-year-old, 50 to 54-year-old has to have a net worth of about $2.7 million. If you live in New York, $2.7 million is a lot of money. If you live in a, name any average size city in the US, as I tell donors, that's enough to worry about. And that's enough for a gift officer to sit down and have a different type of conversation with
All
me.
right.
To be in the 5% household wealth, it's about double. So it's about 6 million. These are 50-year-olds. To be in the 1%, it's approaching 14 million. So 14 million, that's a no-brainer. But even donors who have, 3, 4, 5, $6 million in net worth, you want to begin to engage them in a different type of conversation, one that's going to set your organization apart, because not many organizations are having these, sadly, are having these types of conversations. But two, you're going to do the donor a favor by putting a set of questions that they should be asking. Their advisors, candidly, should be asking them. But as we tell donors, advisors stay in their lane, as do we, and we should, they should. And a lot of advisors just don't have the working language to have these beyond the tax benefits of giving. They don't have the working language to have these conversations with their clients about their philanthropy. So that's our job to have these conversations. So that's kind of where we start. 50 and above, those who are looking under the hood, those who have a consecutive year giving history, those who have attended at least three events, those who have higher capacity. At the end of the day, every nonprofit has limited number of staff, limited minutes and hours in a day. And so if you have limited staff, limited budget, you do want to orient these charitable gift planning conversations to your higher capacity donors, because it's going to produce a much larger average gift. I
Yeah.
hope that answers your question.
No, it does. It was great. And what struck me was your comment that often financial advisors don't necessarily have the expertise or the language or the familiarity with some of the gift planning techniques that you would have knowledge of, or certain plan giving experts, or maybe those that are in sort of the legal side of gift planning would have as well.
Mhm.
So it's important. I think my reaction is that how important it is to be familiar with those tools and how they're implemented. And it doesn't take a PhD to to sort of know the basics, I guess, of how you can help someone. And we talk a lot about bequests, and that seems like a no-brainer, right? Wills and trust, et cetera. But what are the vehicles that kind of get you excited when you explore them with clients and you explore them with prospective donors? What are the things that maybe people should be really thinking about as
Mhm.
they're talking to prospective donors and they're not?
Yeah, good question. So some of the easy ones are qualified charitable distributions joined with a percentage beneficiary or beneficiary of a donor's retirement account.
Okay.
So that's a pretty easy for those donors who are at least 70 and a half, or for the most part, I would argue they're at least 70 years old, at least they're in the required minimum distribution phase for a retirement account. They can make a gift up this year, 108,000 directly from their administrator to a nonprofit. Next year it jumps to 115,000 because this is indexed to inflation. So if a donor is making a QCD, then they're telling you, I don't need all my discretionary income. And that may be indicative for that donor that they don't need all of their assets, or they're not going to give all their assets to their heirs.
Yeah.
So that's an easy blended gift. The other easy blended gift would be a donor advised fund. If the CRM is doing its job and the gift officers are doing their job, to the extent the donor is identifying themselves as the funder of a DAF gift, they need to be about asking those donors, what's the long-term goal for their DAF? The average donor advised fund in the US is a little under 120,000.
Okay.
And I would argue most of them, the goal is not for intergenerational philanthropy. It's a giving vehicle.
Yeah.
On average, they give about 22% of the balance of those accounts every year. So if it's a giving vehicle versus to replace a family foundation, then we need to ask donors what's their plan for if there's a balance left in their donor advised fund, right?
Nice. Yeah.
They can name a nonprofit as a beneficiary of that. And so that's another
That's
opportunity.
huge, Dave, because with all the work that I'm doing, I guess DAFs are relatively new in the sense that they've come on the scene hot and heavy, but
Yes,
I haven't found people talking about a DAF beneficiary, which is so important.
very important. And now with, in the One Big Beautiful Bill, we have the 0.5% floor that we have to 0.5% of our AGI for those who itemize. We have to meet that floor as a donor before we get a deduction. So if my AGI is 200,000, my gifts have to exceed $1,000 before I get the benefit of a deduction. If I'm a high income taxpayer at 37% tax rate, that's now capped at 35%. So you have this 0.5% floor that we have to meet on an annual basis, and the 35% cap. So we think there's going to see maybe not a huge acceleration in donor advised funds, but people who already have them, they're going to bunch their giving. They're going to say over the next 3 to 5 years, our giving is going to be $200,000. And they're going to front load their DAF in 2026 with $200,000 as appreciated stock. Or
Yeah.
maybe they write a check, hopefully not, but hopefully they're giving a capital appreciated asset.
Right.
And then for the next 3 to 5 years, their DAF is their giving vehicle. So they don't have to worry about that floor and ceiling during those years, but maybe every 3 to 5 years, they have to manage that. So we think that's going to, again, impact the amount of money that's given to DAFs for donors who want to front load it or bunch it, whatever phrase you want to use. And again, all the more reason to talk to them about what's your uh, goal for it, and if it's not multi-generational philanthropy, would you consider leaving us a percentage beneficiary or maybe the whole thing? So those would be the other things. Would be certainly any capital appreciated. Real estate gets me really excited because it's not that a nonprofit's going to receive 10 gifts of real estate a year. Some don't receive one a year, but let's say they receive one every other year. but that average gift is, it's 1.5 million, or it's 1 million, or it's 5 million. I mean,
Right.
then I'm not really concerned about the number, but as a percentage, it can really help the nonprofits, meet some of their goals. And then we get really excited when we talk about charitable trust, because those per the Giving USA Foundation leave a legacy report, and in that report, the largest planned gifts were charitable trust.
Okay.
And the donors who reported funding a current charitable trust, out of about 1,000 donors, 117, no, 170 reported funding a current charitable trust. They reported assets of at least $10 million. So they're the wealthiest donors, they're generous donors. And again, that's an example of where gift planning helps meet the needs of those donors, because a bequest is not meeting their need. That's
Hmm.
not what they're doing. They're doing something more complex. So those are the kinds of vehicles that excite us.
Yeah, yeah, and for good reason. There's just so many opportunities to be in partnership with a donor to give them a win and in the organization a win as well. Given your work with high capacity donors and families, I'd be interested to know more about the kinds of donor motivations you see in these engagements, that maybe don't get surfaced in the normal fundraising process or with your sort of standard um, plan giving model.
Yeah, good question. So depending on the wealth of the donor, and I would say for donors they're in the 10% household wealth in the US. And like I said, if they're 50 to 54, it requires a net worth of about 2.7. Even somebody who's 70 to 74 years old, it bumps up to about 3 million, but doesn't get much above 3 million. So it's, 2.5 to 3.
Okay.
The right question for those donors, in my opinion, if they think about their heirs, is how much is enough for your heirs to receive an inheritance? And this may scare some gift officers away. Why would I talk to a donor about their heirs' inheritance? And my point is always, because if you're not, they're thinking about it as you're
Right.
talking to them about an estate gift.
Right.
How's that going to impact my heirs? So the question about how much is enough, and most donors, the answer to that is enough to give them margin. So what if I give, or we give heirs 75, 80, 85, 90% of our estate? That's more than most parents will say they inherited. So it's gravy. And if they give, 10, 15, 20% of their estate to charity, the psychology of that is, what's going to have the greatest impact? Me leaving a $200,000 gift to this hospital foundation, or my two children splitting another 100,000? That's a pretty good question to put for donors to think through. So how much is enough? For donors who are wealthy, and that number varies from region to region, but let's say it's everybody who has at least 10 million in assets. But certainly if they are in a taxable, estate, which next year it'll be, 30 million estate tax free. So anything above 30 will be taxable at the federal level anyway. But the question is, how much is enough? How much is too much? So if I'm worth $20 million, 25, $30 million, I'm still under the federal estate tax exemption. But if
Right.
I have one or two children, do I really want to give each of them $10 million or $15 million?
Right.
Not many people. There are always exceptions, and I know that. And I've worked with donors who have made exceptions, and they've made some really big mistakes in this area.
Yeah.
So how much is too much? I remember years ago, I was working with this donor to higher ed, and this was before Zoom. So it was before, pre-COVID. And the gift officer sent him our questionnaire before we met. And this donor lived in London, actually, didn't live in the States, though the business was located in the States. And he started within 2 minutes of our conversation. He said, "I want you to know, I wish I'd had these questions put before me 2 years ago because we've already offloaded more than $200 million to our heirs irrevocably. And it was a tax play. We were trying to do this efficiently, but we didn't think through the impact that this is going to have on our children. Now, that's kind of an obscene example,
Right.
but also there are lots of parents who would say they would have just as much fear and trepidation about giving an heir 15 million or 10 million or even 7 or 8. So how much is too
Some would
much?
have concern about giving $20,000 to their heirs. So
Fair enough. Yes. And then for those who have wealth and they still have concerns about their heirs, that I mean, the majority of those inheritances are going to go into trust or a trust or multiple trusts to benefit them, and hopefully they'll mature and learn how to manage money and won't be a spendthrift, whatever.
right.
But that's so then the question is, okay, how much is too much? If I can answer that, then how much margin is left in my estate, and what are my goals for that? Do I want it to go into a donor advised fund? And that's where I have a lot of fear and trepidation around DAFs, because that's where advisors candidly are pushing, right? For estate owners to make their testamentary gifts to their DAF versus directly to nonprofits. At the end of the day, we're all compensated in one way, right? And advisors are compensated based on assets under management, so I get it. But the philanthropic impact question is not something that they've really thought through or even helped their clients think through. Again, that's why we have to advance these questions, because our job is to get these donors to think about how much is enough? How much is too much? What kind of impact do I want to have? What's the timing of that? What assets can be used now to help me sustain our lifestyle? What assets are best to give to children? What assets are best to give to nonprofits? And we have to advance that because the impact question, is so important.
Yes.
So, and then I would say discussions about complex assets. Uh, there are, I would say, and this is a blanket statement, I'm okay with making it. I would argue that every certainly high net worth donor should probably never write a check to a nonprofit. They should be making gifts of appreciated stock, right? From a non-qualified account, or if they're in the required minimum distribution phase, certainly giving the whole of their RMD, to charity.
Yep.
So again, these complex assets, what are your goals for them? Do you need them to sustain your lifestyle? If you don't, are you willing to give up control? And then what's the best way to do that? So there are nonprofits, some small to medium-sized nonprofits, that they shouldn't accept some of these complex assets, real estate. They don't want to be in the real estate business, but they can source a third party, not us. They can source a third party, their local community foundation,
Yeah.
charitable solutions in Jacksonville, other Renaissance, these third parties who can receive these assets, liquidate them, and then per the donor's advice, then they grant those assets, those dollars to a nonprofit. So there are ways to do it, but complex assets is a conversation that we need to have with higher capacity, let alone high net worth donors.
Yeah. Yeah. What I think is interesting about your approach is that you're having some very courageous conversations with these donors, and often doing it with the language that you need and the expertise you need to be able to have them.
Yeah.
So you don't get sort of trapped at the end of a conversation without knowing where the exit is, or where the
Right.
on-ramp is. And it does take the right questions, but it also takes the courage to have these conversations, which fundraisers should have that courage, because how do you develop that relationship with your donors without the ability to kind of know them and know what's important to them and what they're trying to accomplish? So I love the fact that you're able to help organizations by modeling or by delivering those courageous conversations.
Yeah, and this is going to sound maybe a little, I don't know, maybe like an oversell, but I promise you this, that when gift officers have those type of conversations, that deepens the relationship that that donor has with that organization.
Right.
Again, because not enough people are talking to their donors about this. We still live in a world where too many nonprofit culture, the fundraising culture at least, is transactional,
Right.
and this helps set one apart, set an organization apart that you're just going to raise more money. I mean, we know that, particularly when you talk about every donor has agency, right? And I've talked about this in presentations, like Bill Gates' agency or Melinda Gates' agency or Kendra Scott's is more than we'll ever imagine, right? But again, I've got a net worth. And as I think through some of these hard questions, but the right discovery questions, that's going to generate a much larger average gift. The average plane gift in the US is about 80,000 somewhere. Higher ed, it's a little larger, maybe 120 to 125. But if for for higher capacity charitable gift planning conversations, very few of those in don't end up with a blended gift. So whatever they do now plus later, the combined gift is just a lot larger than 80,000.
Yeah.
So that's why we, want to talk about their agency and their impact and work with their advisors. Maybe they end up leaving some to their DAF, maybe not, but their impact for us is so important. And if they're a consecutive year giving donor, they have high affinity. So most of those want to have an immediate and a long-term impact on those organizations.
Yeah, I gotcha. Well, what are the structural, cultural changes a nonprofit needs to make to move from we'll take the planned gift when they're ready to we proactively engage donors around gift planning strategy?
Yeah, so gosh, several things. I would say one, you have to have buy-in from leadership and board,
Okay.
because if you don't, that organization, you may get buy-in from the director of gift planning, you may get buy-in from the director of gift planning and one or two major principal gift officers, but if you don't have it from the CEO or the leadership and the board, it's going to default to planned giving,
Yep.
because the push for current dollars, gifts of cash, will prevail. That's
Yeah.
just the nature of the beast. So that's one. And I would say two, you have to move from what we would call a siloed approach where, marketing and communications in their silo, major gifts in their silo, annual gifts, principal gifts, plain gifts, to a collaborative approach, and that incentives are put in place by leadership to incentivize colleagues to collaborate and function as one team serving a
Good.
donor. And so that's you're putting metrics around that so everybody is one accountable, but also that everybody knows their role and that they can execute that role over the next 12 months, and they're going to be judged, of course, by it. And then I would say, thirdly or fourthly, kind of initial gift planning training. Most major and principal gift officers, if they articulate some fear of having a gift planning conversation, it's because they're afraid a donor is going to ask them a question they don't know the answer.
Right. Of
So there
course.
has to be some general knowledge, and I would argue less technical expertise, but more, what are the benefits of making this type of gift to the donor? And then, working with their advisor, their advisors, et cetera, to put structure around it. Obviously, if it's a charitable trust, their attorney has to draft the document for the donor to execute. But there has to be some working. My friend Stephen Myers wrote a book called The Fundraising Matrix, and in it he said, gift officers don't have to be experts, but they have to be enlightened generalists. So
It's
they have to know, and I think that's a good explanation, a good way to put it. So they have
a
to know.
great phrase.
Yeah.
Enlightened generalists.
Yes.
So good.
Um, and then I would say, with regard to training, there has to be a commitment to ongoing training. Obviously, there's a lot of staff turnover in nonprofits. So once a year, you're going to have one or two or three new major gift staff, and tax laws are going to change. So there has to be a commitment to that for, I would argue, a robust program.
Right.
Uh, and then a robust stewardship program. So Russell James published a study, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago that found over a 10-year period, 44% of donors removed a charitable beneficiary from their estate plan. So had someone asked me that what that likely percentage was before I read this study, I would have said 6 to 8%.
Yeah, much lower.
Actually, 44%. So that's alarming.
Surprising.
Uh, it calls for really robust good stewardship programs, because if I'm talking to a donor again who's 55, 58, 60 years old, they live their life expectancy. That's a 30-year stewardship journey. And that's a lot. It's also a 30-year, donor journey, but that the stewardship has to be in place to ensure that the stick rate, those who say you're in their estate plan, and then when they die, if we're talking just about bequest, when they die, you actually are, that stick rate remains very high. So I think
Yeah,
those are.
so tempting to ignore the folks that have made those indications, those gifts, um, and you can't forget them, even if they're not giving to you cash on an annual basis, right? I mean, it's
Right.
just it's easy enough to develop those stewardship programs that will include them, that will honor them, that will keep them engaged. And I'm sensing your validity or validation of that point, that it's just so important.
Robert Sharp Sr. was a giant in our field, sadly died young in his 60s. But he coined this idea that when a donor adds a nonprofit as a charitable beneficiary, they've elevated that nonprofit to the status of family.
Okay.
Because you're sitting alongside children, grandchildren, siblings, partners, heirs, right?
Right.
Family.
Yes.
And that is a big deal. And we need to treat it like it's a big deal. And if I've elevated you to the status of family, I also have some expectation that you're going to maintain a relationship with me. That same Giving USA Leave a Legacy report found that a donor only needs one relationship with an institution to stay engaged, to give them a look under the hood. And so the idea that we accept their notification and then go on our merry way, that doesn't comport with the expectations of a donor. And that's why 44% of them, not all 44, that's why a significant percentage of that 44% removed it, because they lost relationship or contact with those nonprofits. So that's, very
No, it's
important.
great advice. I mean, we always stress the importance of having multiple connections to an organization, the redundancy of it all,
Yeah.
the proverbial bus, coming to take one of us out, and who has that capacity to pick up the relationship and move it forward, right? So it's just
Exactly.
such good advice.
Yeah.
I'd love a good case example, if you don't mind. I always get excited when I hear these success stories. And I'd love to hear one where a gift planning approach yielded a significantly different result than the more traditional plan giving ask. And could be size, timing, or donor relationship. But what's a cool example that you can share with us that would get us sort of feeling very excited about this opportunity we're talking about?
Sure. So this is a really cool example, and it's probably a once in a lifetime
Okay.
experience for me. This is a big healthcare system client, and this donor was on my schedule. For this client, I was working directly with some donors and still are, but this woman was on my schedule. Her husband was a retired cardiologist. The following year, he was going to turn 75.
Yeah.
And she wanted me to talk about endowing a scholarship in his name for his 75th birthday. What a great birthday
Perfect.
gift.
Yeah, love it.
And he's mentored a ton of young cardiologists in this city and was beloved. They're both beloved. And so she was thinking about a $50,000 endowment. Their minimum for this school of medicine is 25,000. So 50,000. I'm not minimizing that gift.
It's great.
It's a gift. But as we, had a charitable gift planning conversation, things emerged like one son was and is the president of a big regional bank. So, we know what he well compensated. One son is an attorney. One son leads a big nonprofit. So, she said, gosh, our children, they didn't graduate with any debt, big leg up on, their friends, peers, whomever. So over the course of time, she decided that they could actually make a million, fully endow a full scholarship for $1 million. So she ended up committing $1 million without his knowledge. And not only that, but I met with their investment advisor and their CPA, their retiring CPA, and then their new one. She gave the year this gift was decided, $100,000 gift of appreciated stock, $100,000 QCD from her husband's IRA, and then committed 8 more years QCD from IRA. So it went from 50,000 to $1 million, a fully endowed scholarship. They are now, I was actually on site there last week. They have met their third scholarship recipient. So they're using part of this QCD as pass through because they can afford to do that.
Right,
And
right.
so they now met their third, and they're just so excited about their new student who is from India and brilliant student and just it's like a dream story. And so at the gift announcement, he thought he was going to his 75th birthday dinner. Well, he was, but it was, a lot of his colleagues and
Right.
Office of Philanthropy. It was about 100 people, and they announced this gift.
I
And
love
it,
it.
it was very funny because when he got up to speak, he said, my wife has managed our money since my third year in practice, and I literally don't know the name of our CPA. So got a big laugh, and he was telling the truth. He literally didn't know the name of their CPA, and it's just a great gift, right? And now
Yeah.
they're to see the fruits of their generosity while they're here. So
Yes.
that's the benefit again of
And the value of the conversation and
yeah.
the expertise and all of it. So that's a great story. I love it. And I know there's a ton more.
Yeah.
Um, but we only have time for a couple more questions. And the two I choose to ask first, like for organizations that have limited resources, staffing, training, budget, what would you say are the two or three most practical steps that you'd recommend to begin building this gift planning pipeline that is necessary?
Yeah. So I'd say one, make sure that your gift acceptance policies align with leading practices in charitable gift planning.
Okay,
You do want to have, minimums established for certain types of gifts. You want to
good.
have protocols in place to, if maybe every 3 years you talk to a donor who has a piece of real estate that they don't need that they could gift to you, you need to have protocols in place to make that happen. Where your organization probably wouldn't receive it, but you would have a third party to help facilitate that. So I would say
Yes.
gift acceptance policies. I'd say secondly, you want to get some training on how to have these types of conversations. It is it is heavy on being curious. It's heavy on donor discovery.
Yep.
It's heavy on building a full donor fact pattern that you can go back then and make the appropriate recommendation that meets their current needs and goals, their family goals, and the impact they want to have on your organization. So some training, and that's not expensive. And then develop a list. It may be that you have a small organization may have 4, 5, 6, 7 of these conversations a year.
Yep.
Medium-sized organizations, may have 15 to 20 to 25 a year.
Right.
And so, but you want to make sure that you understand your prospects, and that's going to be, longest consecutive giving history, volunteer history, event participation, capacity. You can add age if you want to, but you want your best prospects. And then I would say, if you can afford it, secure a plan giving marketing partner, because that's going to produce to your broader donor base, because that's going to produce some hand raisers to say, hey, you're either in our will already, and so now they can join your legacy society, and you'd want to start one, or it's going to prompt someone to think to know that you're in the business, you're in the gift planning business, and that your organization could receive bequests, and so your marketing can help you make a case for that.
I love it.
That's where I'd start.
Yeah, great advice on getting started. And so many organizations are in that unique moment where they're interested, but probably feel small and question how to even just get things started. So,
Right.
last question, looking ahead 5 to 10 years, how do you see this field of gift planning evolving, especially as you think about demographics, asset types, the sort of government climate that might exist to support um, or detract from these types of gifts? And how should charities sort of be preparing for that future?
Yeah, I would say one, for lapsed donors, the individual donor participation has declined, and it declined
Right, right.
pretty significantly since 2017 because of the doubling of the standard deduction. But I would say take advantage of the new universal deduction in the One Big Beautiful Bill. For non-itemizers, for single filers, it's $1,000 a year they can deduct. For joint filers, for married couples, it's 2,000. So we now have an opportunity to build consecutive year giving donors again from some of these lapsed donors.
Okay.
So bring them back. And again, that's going to require some marketing. They may read it in the Wall Street Journal, but they don't necessarily understand what that means. But the right marketing, the right conversation can help them. So I would say one, because consecutive year giving is the marker for a planned giving prospect, and even for most, charitable gift planning prospects. I'll say secondly, the focus over the next 5 to 10 years is certainly still going to be on baby boomers first. The
Okay.
oldest baby boomer this year turned 78, and baby boomers are estimated to transfer about $100 trillion between now and 2048. That number was updated last year sometime, and it jumped from 80-ish trillion to about 100 trillion. So the orientation is still going to be on baby boomers because they're the wealthiest generation ever. But we then have to start navigating these conversations to the Gen X's and the millennials, because they're inheriting from their parents, and
Right.
that's going to increase their capacity. They think about philanthropy differently, so nonprofits have to understand how they think. Millennials want to have a say in how nonprofits are run, so they want to be more active in that respect than, say, their parents. But we want to spend the time now to build relationships with those with that generation, because they're going to inherit so much, from their families. And then lastly, I would say uh, nonprofits need to understand that uh, a bequest program or a planned giving program never ever cannibalizes our current giving.
Very good.
That we have longitudinal data that says over time, once a donor adds a charitable beneficiary to their estate plan, over the next 5 years, they increase their annual giving to that organization by 72%.
Important.
So as you think about ways to grow your revenue, right? So it's both and. It is plain giving program, it's a charitable gift planning program, and then all the annual major and principal gifts. But if you have these other components for plan giving and gift planning, that is actually going to help you grow your current dollars. Because again, going back to donors have elevated you to the status of family. Well, while I'm alive, I want our daughter to be healthy, right? And do well and be a productive citizen and do things that lead to, a flourishing, life. We think the same way about our nonprofits that we've elevated to the status of family. We want to help them now. And so the example of that gift I showed you, they
Yeah.
had never made a $200,000 gift in 1 year to any nonprofit.
Right.
They made a $200,000 gift to this organization in year one, and then they've made a six-figure gift subsequent every year, and they'll do that until it reaches $1 million. So those are, I think the biggest things we see. Now, tax laws could change again. The good news is the universal deduction is not set to sunset. And so that's why we're saying use this as an opportunity to build some giving memory muscle and build some consecutive year giving donors. If it were going to sunset in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, why spend the time? But it's not scheduled to sunset. So I think it'll be time well spent for the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Great advice. And if someone wants to learn more, get in touch with you, how should they find you? What would be the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Our email address is easy, dave@heatonsmithgroup.com.
Mhm.
And then they can follow me on LinkedIn. They can follow Heaton Smith on LinkedIn. We don't post marketing stuff on Heaton Smith's LinkedIn page, or mine for that matter. So I really encourage people to follow us, Heaton Smith on LinkedIn, because we try to, push information that's going to help them raise money, help them think about how to have a different conversation, with their donors, how to identify, gift planning prospects, et cetera. So david@heatonsmithgroup.com is the best way to reach me.
Yeah, and so everybody out there in the audience, please do look Dave up on LinkedIn, follow him, and pick up on that advice that he's going to be pushing out. Definitely one of the most knowledgeable experts in the field of gift planning that exists in the United States. And so don't miss those opportunities to learn from him. So for all of you out there that enjoyed the show, I would encourage you to like and subscribe to the Nonprofit Edge. And we also have 2 other podcasts that I would invite you to look into: Lead for Good and also Mastering Fundraising. All 3 podcasts interview extraordinary leaders and really dig into their expertise to help you, the audience, know more about the field of nonprofit leadership, fundraising, et cetera. So thanks, Dave, again for being on our show.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. And thanks to all of you for being out there and sharing time with us. We look forward to seeing you again very soon. Take care.
Thank you for joining us for the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast series to promote purpose in practice. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation and learned some important lessons from our featured expert. We always want our content to be informative and to position nonprofit leaders to succeed. Please join us again for our next podcast. In the meantime, we wish you all the best and encourage you to learn more about Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership by visiting our website at www.fulcrumleader.com.